My husband handed me divorce papers 3 days after we buried my father. While I was still wearing black, still smelling the funeral flowers in my hair, he slid those papers across our kitchen table and told me he deserved half of everything my dead father left behind. He had no idea what was coming. He had no idea who my father really was, or what he'd actually left me. By the time I was done, my husband would lose everything he'd spent 5 years building, and I'd be standing on top of the ruins, finally free. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone who waited for your worst moment to show their true face, this story is for you. But first, let me know in the comment section where you are watching my revenge story from. Like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of my revenge stories. Because today I'm sharing how I took back everything that was stolen from me, and how the man who thought he could use my grief against me learned the hardest lesson of his life. My name is Maya Chen, and for 5 years I thought I was living a good life. Not perfect, but good enough. I was 32 years old, working as a high school art teacher in Sacramento, California, making about $45,000 a year. My husband, Derek Morrison, was a real estate agent who made around $70,000, sometimes more when the market was hot. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved at each other from their driveways. Derek and I met at a friend's barbecue 6 years ago. He was charming, confident, and always knew what to say to make people laugh. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he asked me out, I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery. He was handsome, successful, and he seemed so sure about everything. I was quieter, more reserved. I spent my weekends painting in my tiny apartment, reading books, and visiting my father. My father, Lin Chen, was my entire world. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just the two of us. He worked long hours at his job, something in logistics and imports that I never fully understood because he never talked about it much. He was a private man, but very serious, always focused on making sure I had everything I needed. He paid for my college, helped me with my first car, called me every Sunday, without fail. He lived simply, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Chinatown, and he never spent money on himself. Everything he had, he wanted to save for me. When I introduced Derek to my father, I could see something in Dad's eyes. He was polite, shook Derek's hand, asked him questions about his work. But later, when Derek went to the bathroom, my father pulled me aside. "Be careful, Maya," he said quietly in Mandarin. "This man, he looks at you like you're a prize, not a person." I laughed it off. "Dad, you're too protective. Derek loves me." My father didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, "I hope you're right." Derek and I got married a year later. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family. My father paid for most of it, even though Derek insisted we should split the cost. But Dad refused. "This is my daughter's wedding," he said firmly. "I will take care of it." The first 2 years of marriage were happy. We went on trips, cooked dinner together, talked about maybe having kids someday. But slowly, things started to shift. Derek began working longer hours, coming home later. He started talking more about money, about how we needed to invest, to build wealth, to plan for the future. He'd get frustrated when I said I was happy with my teaching job, that I didn't want to switch to something higher paying. "You could be making twice that if you worked in administration," he'd say. "Why are you wasting your potential?" "I like teaching kids," I'd reply. "It's not about the money." He'd sigh, shake his head, like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. Then, 3 years into our marriage, my father got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then fatigue, then weight loss. By the time the doctors figured out it was lung cancer, it had already spread. Stage 4. They gave him 6 months, maybe a year, if he was lucky. I was devastated. I took time off work to be with him, to drive him to appointments, to sit beside his hospital bed and hold his hand. Derek was supportive at first. He'd come to the hospital, bring my father soup, and ask how he was doing. But after a few weeks, I noticed he was getting impatient. "Maya, you're spending every day at that hospital," he said one night. "You need to take care of yourself too." "He's dying, Derek," I said, tears streaming down my face. He's my father. I can't just leave him alone. Derek softened, put his arm around me. I know.
I'm sorry.
I just worry about you. But as the months went on, Derek's patience wore thinner. He started complaining that I wasn't around enough, that the house was a mess, that we never had time together anymore. He'd make comments about how much time I was wasting at the hospital, how my father had lived a full life, and I needed to accept that. One night, about 8 months into my father's illness, we had a huge fight. I'd come home exhausted after spending 12 hours at the hospital. My father had been in terrible pain, crying out, and the nurses had struggled to get his medication right. I was emotionally destroyed, barely holding it together. Derek was sitting on the couch watching TV when I walked in. He didn't even look up. "There's no dinner," he said flatly. I stared at him. I said, "There's no dinner. I've been home for 3 hours and there's nothing to eat." Something inside me snapped. My father is dying, Derek. He's in agony. I've been holding his hand while he screams in pain, and you're upset about dinner? Derek finally looked at me, his face cold. Your father has been dying for 8 months, Maya. At some point, life has to go on. I felt like he'd punch me in the stomach. I couldn't even respond. I just turned around, went to our bedroom, and cried until I fell asleep. 2 weeks later, my father died. It was a Tuesday morning, early, just as the sun was coming up. I was there, holding his hand. His last words to me were in Mandarin. "Be strong, my daughter. You are stronger than you know." Then he closed his eyes, and he was gone. The funeral was on Friday. It was a traditional Chinese funeral, with a viewing, prayers, incense. About 50 people came, mostly my father's friends from Chinatown, a few of my colleagues, some distant relatives. Derek was there, standing beside me in a black suit, his face appropriately somber. But I noticed he kept checking his phone and kept glancing at his watch. After the burial, after everyone had left, Derek drove us home in silence. I was numb, hollowed out, barely aware of my surroundings. When we got inside, I went straight to the bedroom and collapsed on the bed, still wearing my black dress. I didn't move for 3 days. I called in sick to work. I barely ate. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a part of me had been ripped out and buried with my father. On the 3rd day, Derek came into the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought maybe he was going to comfort me, to tell me he loved me, that we'd get through this together. Instead, he said, "Maya, we need to talk about your father's estate." I turned my head slowly to look at him. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your father's will. His assets. We need to figure out what he left behind and how we're going to handle it." I sat up confused. "Derek, I just buried him 3 days ago." "I know, and I'm sorry, but these things have to be dealt with. Your father owned that apartment, right? And he probably had savings, retirement accounts. We need to get all that sorted out." I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest. "Why are you talking about this right now?" Derek's expression hardened. "Because we're married, Maya. Whatever he left you is community property. It belongs to both of us. And I think we should sell the apartment, put that money toward a bigger house. This place is too small. We could really upgrade." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to sell my father's apartment? The place where I grew up? It's just an apartment, Maya. And it's in Chinatown, probably worth 300, maybe 400,000. That's a lot of money. We'd be stupid not to use it." I felt something breaking inside me. Not sadness this time, but anger. Cold, sharp anger. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" I said, "Get out of this room. Right now." Derek stood up, his face flushing. "Don't be dramatic. We're going to have this conversation whether you like it or not. Get out." I screamed, my voice raw and broken. Derek stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I sat there on the bed, shaking, my mind racing. This was the man I'd married. The man who couldn't wait 3 days after my father's death to start counting his money. The next morning, I woke up to find Derek sitting at the kitchen table. There was a manila envelope in front of him and a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked calm, almost businesslike. "Sit down, Maya," he said. I walked slowly to the table and sat across from him, my heart pounding. Derek slid the envelope toward me. I think it's time we face reality. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were divorce papers. My eyes scanned the documents, barely processing the words. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Spousal support. You're divorcing me, I said, my voice hollow. Yes, Derek said simply. This marriage isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time. You're too focused on your father, your job, and everything except us. And now that he's gone, I think it's time we both moved on. I looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of remorse, any sign that this was hard for him. There was nothing. He looked relieved. You waited until my father died, I said slowly, the realization hitting me like a truck. You waited until he was gone to do this. Derek shrugged. I waited because I didn't want to make things harder for you while he was sick. I was trying to be considerate. Considerate, I repeated, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. Look, Maya, I'm not trying to be cruel. But we both know this marriage is over. And legally, I'm entitled to half of everything. Half the house, half your father's estate, and half of whatever savings you have. It's only fair. Fair, I said, almost laughing. You think this is fair? It's the law. We've been married for 5 years. I've supported you, been there for you. I deserve my share. I stared at him, this man I'd shared a bed with, shared my life with, and I realized I didn't know him at all. I'd been married to a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who'd been waiting for my father to die so he could cash in. I need you to sign these, Derek continued, tapping the papers. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can both move forward. I didn't sign them. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, packed a bag, and left. I drove to my father's apartment in Chinatown, the place Derek wanted to sell, and I locked myself inside. The apartment smelled like my father, like incense and Chinese tea and old books. I sat on his worn couch and cried until I had no tears left. Then I just sat in silence, surrounded by his things, feeling utterly alone. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Derek was calling, texting, demanding I come home, demanding I sign the papers. I ignored every message. After 2 days, he showed up at the apartment, pounding on the door. Maya, open up. We need to talk. I didn't answer. I sat frozen on the couch, barely breathing, waiting for him to leave. Fine, he yelled through the door. But you can't hide forever. I've already talked to a lawyer. You're going to have to deal with this. When his footsteps finally faded away, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. That night, I started going through my father's things. I wasn't ready to let go of him yet, and touching his belongings made me feel closer to him somehow. I opened drawers, looked through old photo albums, and read letters he'd saved for my mother. In his bedroom closet, I found a locked metal box. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and heavy. I'd never seen it before. There was a small key taped to the bottom. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. Inside was a stack of documents. Legal papers, property deeds, bank statements. I started reading, my confusion growing with every page. My father didn't just own this apartment. He owned the entire building, all 6 units. He also owned 2 other buildings in Chinatown and a warehouse in West Sacramento. And he had accounts at 3 different banks with balances that made my head spin. $5 million. In total. I sat back, the papers scattering across the floor, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. My father, who lived in this modest apartment, who wore the same 3 shirts on rotation, who never bought himself anything, was a millionaire. Multiple times over. There was a letter, handwritten, addressed to me. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry I never told you about my wealth. I wanted you to grow up humble, to understand the value of hard work, to never take anything for granted. I built this fortune slowly, through careful investments and hard work, always thinking of your future. Everything I have is yours. The buildings, the accounts, all of it. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life you deserve. Be careful who you trust. Money changes people. It shows you their true nature. I love you always, your father. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My father had protected me, even after death. He'd given me everything, and he tried to warn me about people like Derek. People who only loved me for what I could give them. I gathered all the documents, put them back in the box, and locked it. Then I called the one person I knew I could trust, my father's lawyer, James Wu. James had handled my father's affairs for 20 years. He was in his 60s, sharp-eyed, with gray hair and a calm, steady presence. We met at his office the next morning. Maya, he said gently, shaking my hand. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Thank you, I said, sitting down across from his desk. Mr. Wu, I found some documents in my father's apartment. I need to understand what they mean. I laid out the papers, and James examined them carefully, nodding as he went through each one. Your father was very organized, he said finally. These are all legitimate. You are the sole beneficiary of his estate. The properties, the accounts, everything. But Derek, I said, my voice tight. My husband. He filed for divorce. He says he's entitled to half of everything. James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That depends. California is a community property state, which means assets acquired during marriage are typically split 50-50 in a divorce. However, inheritances are considered separate property. As long as you keep these assets separate, don't commingle them with marital funds, your husband has no legal claim to them. Relief flooded through me. So he gets nothing? From your inheritance? Correct. He would only be entitled to half of assets you both acquired during the marriage. The house you live in, joint bank accounts, things like that. The house is in both our names, I said. We bought it 3 years ago. Then yes, he'd be entitled to half the equity in that house. But nothing from your father's estate. I nodded slowly, my mind working. Mr. Wu, I need your help. I want to make sure Derek doesn't get a single cent more than he's legally owed. And I want to make him regret ever filing for divorce. James smiled slightly. I think we can arrange that. Over the next week, James and I built a strategy. We gathered every financial document from my marriage, tracked every expense, every joint account. We discovered that Derek had been hiding money. He'd opened a separate savings account I didn't know about and had been funneling cash into it for over a year. Nearly $30,000. This is financial misconduct, James explained. In a divorce, both parties are required to disclose all assets. If he's hiding money, a judge won't look favorably on that. We also found out Derek had been having an affair. I'd suspected it deep down, but seeing the evidence, the hotel receipts, the charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, it still hurt. Her name was Brittany. She was 26, worked at the real estate office with Derek. This strengthens your case, James said. California is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity doesn't directly impact asset division, but it does impact spousal support. If you were to request alimony, his affair would work against him. I don't want his money, I said firmly. I just want him to lose everything he thinks he's entitled to. James nodded. Then let's make sure that happens. Meanwhile, Derek was getting more aggressive. He'd started showing up at my school, waiting for me in the parking lot, demanding I sign the papers. My principal had to ask him to leave twice. He sent me emails, dozens of them, threatening to take me to court, to drag this out, to make it as painful as possible. One email said, "You're being selfish and childish. Your father would be ashamed of you." That one made me want to throw my phone across the room. But instead, I forwarded it to James. Good, James said. Keep forwarding everything. It's all evidence of harassment. 2 weeks after my father's death, Derek filed a motion to force the sale of my father's apartment. He claimed it was community property, that I'd inherited it during our marriage, and therefore he was entitled to half. James shut it down immediately, providing documentation that the apartment was separate property, part of my inheritance. The judge denied Derek's motion in less than a day. Derek was furious. He called me, screaming into the phone. You think you're so smart, Maya? You think you can hide behind your daddy's money? I'm going to take you for everything. I hung up on him. Then I blocked his number. But Derek didn't stop. He hired a more aggressive lawyer, someone with a reputation for ruthless tactics in divorce cases. This lawyer started demanding financial disclosures, depositions, interrogatories. They were trying to bury me in paperwork, to exhaust me, to make me give up. James handled it all calmly. This is just posturing, he assured me. They're trying to intimidate you. Don't let them. One night, I was alone in my father's apartment, going through more of his papers, when I found something else. A journal. My father had kept a daily journal for years, written in Mandarin. I started reading it, slowly translating each entry in my mind. Most of it was mundane. Daily observations, thoughts about his work, memories of my mother. But then I found entries about Derek. Maya's husband came to see me today. He asked me about my investments. He wanted to know how much I was worth. I told him I am a simple man. He didn't believe me. I see greed in his eyes. Derek asked Maya to convince me to co-sign a loan for his business. I refused. He was angry. He hides it well, but I see it. This man does not love my daughter. He loves what he thinks she can give him. I worry for Maya. She is blind to his true nature. I have saved everything I can for her so that when the time comes, she will be protected. I hope she will be strong enough to see the truth. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. My father knew. He'd seen right through Derek from the beginning, and he'd tried to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect his legacy. I met with James Wu again, and this time I wasn't the grieving, confused daughter anymore. I was focused, determined, and ready for war. I want to fight for everything, I told him. I want Derek to walk away from this marriage with as little as possible. What can we do? James pulled out a folder, thick with documents. I've been doing some research on your husband, his finances, his business dealings, and I found some interesting things. He spread papers across his desk. Derek's real estate business isn't doing as well as he claims. In fact, he's been exaggerating his income for years. He reports $70,000 on tax returns, but his actual gross income is closer to $55,000. He's been inflating his numbers to make himself look more successful. Can we use that? I asked. Absolutely. If he's claiming he deserves spousal support or a larger share of assets based on false income claims, we can challenge it. But there's more. James pulled out another document. Remember that separate account I found? The one with $30,000? I dug deeper. That money didn't come from his real estate commissions. It came from your joint account. Over the past 18 months, Derek has been making small transfers, 200 here, 300 there, moving money from your joint savings into his private account. It's called dissipation of marital assets, and it's illegal in California. My eyes widened. He stole from us? Technically, yes. And in a divorce, if one spouse dissipates marital assets, hiding money or spending it wastefully, the court can order them to reimburse the marital estate, which means Derek would have to pay back every cent he hid, and it would be deducted from his share of assets. I felt a smile forming on my face for the first time in weeks. So, he'd actually end up with less than half. Exactly. And there's one more thing. James pulled out a final document. Your house. You said it's in both your names, bought 3 years ago. Yes. We put down $40,000, 20 from each of us. But who's been paying the mortgage? I thought about it. We have a joint account that the mortgage comes out of. We both contribute to it. James nodded. But how much does each of you contribute? I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and checked. My teaching salary had direct deposit into our joint account. Derek's commissions went into his personal account, and then he'd transfer money to the joint account each month. I put in $3,000 a month, I said. Derek puts in, oh. I scrolled through months of statements. Derek's contributions were inconsistent. Some months he'd put in $2,000, other months only $1,000, sometimes nothing at all. Over 3 years, you've contributed significantly more to the mortgage than he has, James said. We can argue that you have a greater equity stake in the house. Combined with his dissipation of assets and hidden income, we can push for a 60-40 split in your favor, maybe even 70-30. I sat back, processing all of this. Derek thought he was going to walk away with half of everything. He had no idea what was coming. "There's one more thing we can do," James said, his tone becoming more serious. "But it's aggressive, and it might get ugly." "I don't care," I said. "Tell me." "We can request a forensic accountant to audit Derek's business. If he's been hiding income, inflating expenses, or engaging in any kind of financial misconduct, a forensic audit will find it. And if we find evidence of fraud, we can not only use it in the divorce, but we could potentially report it to the IRS." I felt a chill run through me. "You mean he could get in legal trouble?" "If he's been cheating on his taxes, yes. That's federal. He could face fines, penalties, even criminal charges, depending on how bad it is." I thought about Derek's face when he handed me those divorce papers. The coldness in his eyes. The way he'd waited until my father died to strike. "Do it," I said. "Audit everything." James nodded. "Understood. This is going to take time, probably several months. Are you prepared for that?" "I have nothing but time," I said. The forensic audit began 2 weeks later. Derek's lawyer tried to block it, claiming it was a fishing expedition, but the judge allowed it, especially given the evidence of hidden accounts and dissipated assets. During this time, I moved out of my father's apartment and into one of the other properties he owned. It was a beautiful 2-bedroom unit with hardwood floors and large windows overlooking Chinatown. I slowly started making it my own, painting the walls, hanging my artwork, turning it into a home. I also went back to work. My students were happy to see me, and throwing myself into teaching helped keep my mind off the divorce. But every night, I'd come home and work with James, going through documents, building our case. Derek, meanwhile, was getting desperate. The forensic accountant had seized his business records, and he knew they were finding things. He started calling me again, using a different number since I'd blocked him. "Maya, please, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "This is getting out of hand. Can't we just settle this like adults?" "You had your chance to be an adult," I replied coldly. "You chose to file for divorce 3 days after my father died. Now you get to live with the consequences." "I'm sorry, okay?" I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. "We can work this out." "No, Derek. We can't. Sign the papers my lawyer sends you, or this goes to trial." "Maya, they're going to audit me. Do you understand what that means? They could destroy my business." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me." I hung up. A few days later, Brittany, Derek's girlfriend, showed up at my school. She was young, blonde, wearing too much makeup and a dress that was completely inappropriate for high school. She waited in the parking lot until I finished for the day. "Maya," she called out as I walked to my car. I stopped, turned to face her. "Can I help you?" "I'm Brittany. I'm seeing Derek." "I know who you are," I said flatly. She looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. "Look, I know this is weird, but Derek is really struggling right now. He's stressed out about the divorce, about the audit. He's not sleeping, he's barely eating. I just thought maybe you could go easy on him." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her audacity. "You want me to go easy on him? He made mistakes, okay? But he's a good guy. He doesn't deserve to have his whole life ruined over this." "He filed for divorce 3 days after my father died," I said, my voice ice cold. "He tried to steal my inheritance. He hid money from me. He cheated on me with you. And you think I should go easy on him?" Brittany's face flushed. "I didn't know he was married when we first got together. But you know now, and you're still with him. That makes you just as bad." "Look, I'm trying to be nice here." "I don't want her nice," I interrupted. "I want you to leave. Now. Before I call security." Brittany glared at me, then turned and stormed off, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. That night, I got an email from James. The subject line said, "You need to see this." I opened it, my heart pounding. The forensic accountant had finished his preliminary report. Derek hadn't just been hiding income. He'd been committing tax fraud for years. underreporting his earnings, claiming false business expenses, even creating fake receipts to inflate his deductions. The estimated amount of unpaid taxes, over $80,000. This is federal tax evasion, James wrote in the email. If we report this to the IRS, Derek could face serious consequences. But I need your permission before I move forward. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the email for a long time. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was about Derek's entire future. If I reported him, he could lose his real estate license, face criminal charges, maybe even go to prison. Part of me felt sick at the thought. But another part of me, the part that remembered how he'd looked at me with cold indifference while I grieved my father, felt nothing but satisfaction. I typed my response, report it. The IRS doesn't move quickly, but when they do move, they move like a freight train. Within 3 weeks of James submitting the forensic audit to the federal authorities, Derek received a notice. He was being investigated for tax evasion. I found out through James, who'd been copied on some of the legal correspondence. Derek's lawyer had tried to keep it quiet, but in a divorce case, financial misconduct is relevant, so the judge ordered full disclosure. Derek called me that night, and this time, he wasn't angry. He was terrified. Maya, please, you have to stop this, he begged, his voice cracking. They're going to destroy me. I'll lose everything. My license, my business, everything. You did this to yourself, I said calmly. I made mistakes, okay? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake, Derek. You committed fraud. For years. And now you have to pay for it. Maya, please. I hung up. The divorce proceedings continued, and with the IRS investigation hanging over Derek's head, his lawyer's aggressive tactics disappeared. Now, they just wanted to settle, to get out as quickly as possible before things got worse. James presented our terms. I would keep my father's entire estate untouched. The house we'd bought together would be sold, and I would receive 70% of the equity due to my higher contributions to the mortgage and Derek's dissipation of marital assets. Derek would have to repay the $30,000 he'd hidden in his separate account, which would be deducted from his share of the house proceeds. Derek's lawyer tried to negotiate, but James was unmovable. These are the terms, he said. Accept them, or we go to trial, and I will personally make sure every detail of your client's financial misconduct becomes public record. Derek signed the papers 2 days later. The house sold quickly. After paying off the mortgage, there was about $90,000 in equity. I received $63,000. Derek received $27,000, and then had to immediately pay back the $30,000 he'd hidden, leaving him with negative $3,000. He actually owed money to the marital estate. James structured it, so Derek had to make payments to me, $500 a month until the debt was paid off. Every month, Derek would have to send me money, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. But the IRS investigation was the real punishment. Derek was audited going back 7 years. They found fraud every single year. The total amount he owed in back taxes, penalties, and interest was over $120,000. Derek didn't have that kind of money. His business was barely surviving, and with the investigation public record, clients started leaving him. No one wants to work with a real estate agent who's being investigated for tax fraud. He tried to work out a payment plan with the IRS, but they garnished his wages, taking 25% of everything he earned until the debt was paid. He had to sell his car, a luxury BMW he'd always been so proud of. He moved out of his apartment and into a tiny studio in a bad part of town. Brittany left him 3 months after the investigation started. Apparently, dating a broke guy being investigated by the federal government wasn't as fun as dating a successful real estate agent. I heard all of this through mutual friends, people who'd been at our wedding, who'd known us as a couple. They'd reach out to me, cautiously, asking how I was doing, and they'd mention Derek almost apologetically. He's really struggling, one friend said. I saw him at the grocery store last week. He looked terrible. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little bit. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Derek, handwritten, several pages long. Maya, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need to say this, even if you throw this letter away without finishing it. I was wrong. About everything. I married you because I loved you, or at least I thought I did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as an opportunity. When your father got sick, all I could think about was what would happen after he died, what you'd inherit, how it would change our lives. I thought I was being practical, planning for our future. But I was just being greedy. I should have been there for you when your father died. I should have held you, comforted you, helped you grieve. Instead, I handed you divorce papers because I thought I could take half of what he left you. Asterisk, I destroyed our marriage for money I was never entitled to, and now I've lost everything. My business, my reputation, my future. The IRS is taking everything I earn, and I'll be paying off this debt for the next 10 years, maybe longer. But worse than all of that, I lost you. And I lost any chance of being the man I thought I was. I know you'll never forgive me, and you shouldn't. What I did was unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I understand that now. I understand what I destroyed, and I live with that every single day. I hope you're happy, Maya. I really do. You deserved so much better than me. Derek. I read the letter once, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt done. My life had moved forward in ways I never expected. With my father's estate, I'd become financially secure for the first time in my life. I didn't have to worry about bills, about saving for retirement, about any of the financial stress that had always lurked in the background. But more than that, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I'd faced betrayal at my lowest moment, and instead of crumbling, I'd fought back. I'd protected what my father had built for me, and I'd made sure the man who'd tried to take it paid for what he'd done. I used some of the inheritance to renovate my father's apartment building, making it more modern and comfortable for the tenants. I kept the rents reasonable because I knew my father would have wanted that. He'd always cared more about providing good housing for people than about maximizing profits. I also started a scholarship fund at my school in my father's name. Every year, it would help 3 students from immigrant families pay for college. The first recipient was a girl named Lynn, same name as my father, who wanted to study engineering. When I handed her the scholarship check, she cried and hugged me, and I felt my father's presence so strongly it took my breath away. At work, I threw myself into teaching with a renewed passion. I started an after-school art program, helping kids who couldn't afford private lessons develop their talents. Some of my students were incredibly gifted, and watching them create beautiful things, seeing their confidence grow, reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. One afternoon, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, I was in my classroom setting up for the art program when someone knocked on the door. It was James Wu. "Mr. Wu," I said, surprised. "Is everything okay? Is there a problem with the estate?" He smiled. "No, nothing like that. Everything's been settled for months now. I just wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." I invited him in, and we sat at the student desks, looking almost comical, 2 adults in child-sized chairs. "I'm doing well," I said honestly. "Better than I expected, actually." "I'm glad to hear that. Your father would be proud of you, Maya. The way you handled everything, the strength you showed, it was remarkable." "I learned from the best," I said softly. James was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your father talked about you all the time. Every meeting we had, he'd tell me something you'd done, something you'd said. He was so proud of you. Not because of any accomplishment or achievement, but because of who you were, your kindness and your integrity." Tears stung my eyes. "I miss him so much." "I know. But he left you more than money, Maya. He left you his wisdom, his values, and his strength. Those are the things that got you through this." After James left, I sat in my empty classroom for a long time, thinking about my father, about Derek, about everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from one of my friends, inviting me to dinner that weekend. I smiled and typed back a yes. Life was moving forward, and I was ready to move with it. 3 years later, I was a different person. Not broken and remade, but evolved and stronger. Clearer about who I was, and what I wanted. The divorce had taught me to trust my instincts, to see people for who they really were, not who I wanted them to be. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless, and that sometimes the people who seem the most confident are actually the most insecure. I was sitting in a cafe in downtown Sacramento, grading papers and drinking tea, when someone sat down at the table next to mine. I glanced up out of habit, then did a double take. It was Derek. He looked different. Older, thinner, with gray threading through his hair. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, nothing like the designer clothes he used to wear. He had a laptop bag over his shoulder and was carrying a coffee. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. His face went pale, and for a second, I thought he might just turn around and leave. But he didn't. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet from my table. "Maya," he said quietly. "Derek." We stared at each other for a long moment. I waited for some feeling to hit me, anger, sadness, something. But there was nothing. He was just a stranger who used to be my husband. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. "Really good, actually." He nodded. "That's good. I'm glad." Another silence. Then Derek said, "I'm working as an administrative assistant now, at a property management company. It's not much, but it's steady." "That's good," I said, and I meant it. Not because I was happy for him, but because I was genuinely indifferent. "I'm still paying off the IRS," he continued, like he needed to confess. "It'll be a few more years, but I'm managing." "Okay." Derek looked down at his feet, then back at me. "Maya, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know, Derek. Maybe someday. But honestly, I don't think about you enough to be angry anymore. You're just part of my past, and I've moved on." Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt maybe, or regret. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I really am sorry. For everything." "I know," I said. And I did believe him. He was sorry he'd gotten caught, sorry he'd lost everything, sorry his plan had backfired so completely. Whether he was sorry for hurting me, I'd never know, and it didn't matter anymore. Derek nodded one last time, then walked away to a table on the other side of the cafe. I watched him open his laptop and start typing, just another person working in a coffee shop, and I felt nothing. I went back to grading papers, sipping my tea, and when I finished, I packed up my things and walked out into the sunshine. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and I had an art class to teach in an hour. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Angela. "Still on for dinner Friday? I want to introduce you to someone." I smiled. Angela had been trying to set me up for months, convinced I needed to start dating again. I'd resisted, but lately, I'd been thinking she might be right. Not because I needed someone, but because I was finally ready to open myself up to the possibility. "Sure," I texted back. "I'm in." As I drove through the streets of Sacramento, past Chinatown where my father had lived, past the school where I taught, past the coffee shop where I'd just seen Derek, I thought about the journey I'd been on. My father had died 3 years ago, and at that moment, I thought my world was ending. Derek had filed for divorce and tried to take everything, and I thought I'd never recover. But I had recovered. I'd fought back, and I'd won. Not just in court, not just financially, but in every way that mattered. I'd reclaimed my life, my dignity, my strength. Derek had lost his business, his reputation, his future. He'd wanted my father's money so badly that he'd destroy himself trying to get it. And me? I'd built something beautiful out of the ashes. I'd honored my father's legacy, helped my students, created a life I was proud of. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how hard I went after Derek, if I feel guilty about reporting him to the IRS, about taking 70% of the house, about any of it. I don't. My father taught me to be kind, to be generous, and to help others. But he also taught me to be strong, to protect what's mine, to never let anyone take advantage of me. Derek chose to betray me at my lowest moment. He chose to try to profit from my grief. He made his choices, and he lived with the consequences. I made my choices too, and I'm living with those consequences. And my consequences look pretty damn good. 5 years after my father's death, I stood in front of a room full of high school students at graduation. I was giving a speech as the Teacher of the Year, an honor I never expected but was deeply grateful for. Life will test you, I told them, my voice steady and clear. It will put you in situations where you have to choose between being kind and being strong. And I want you to know that you can be both. You should be both. I looked out at their young faces, at their parents sitting proudly in the audience, and I continued. Someone I loved very much once told me that difficult times show you people's true nature. When things are good, everyone can pretend to be decent. But when things get hard, when you're at your lowest, that's when you see who people really are. I learned that lesson the hard way. But I also learned that you are stronger than you think. That you can survive betrayal, loss, heartbreak, and come out the other side not just intact, but better. After the ceremony, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I did this every month, bringing fresh flowers, sitting by his headstone, talking to him about my life. "Hey, Dad," I said, settling onto the grass next to his grave. "I gave a speech today. I think you would have liked it. I talked about strength and kindness, about the lessons you taught me." The wind rustled through the trees, and I smiled. "I miss you every day. But I'm okay. Actually, I'm more than okay. I'm happy. Derek's doing fine, I guess. I saw him a few months ago. He's working, paying off his debts, living a quiet life. I don't hate him anymore. I don't really feel anything about him at all." I pulled a few weeds from around the headstone, straightening the flowers. Angela set me up on a date. His name is Michael. He's a teacher too, and works at an elementary school. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months now. It's good, Dad. It's really good. He's kind, he's honest, he makes me laugh. You would have liked him. I sat there in the quiet, feeling the sun on my face, and I felt at peace. My father had given me so much more than money. He'd given me the tools to survive, to fight back, to build a life worth living. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "For everything. For protecting me, even after you were gone. For teaching me to be strong. For loving me enough to let me stand on my own." As I drove away from the cemetery, my phone rang. It was James Wu. "Maya, I have some news," he said. "One of your father's properties, the warehouse in West Sacramento, a development company wants to buy it. They're offering $3.2 million. I pulled over, my hands shaking slightly. $3.2 million? Yes. It's a very good offer. The area is being redeveloped, property values are skyrocketing. Your father bought that warehouse for $200,000 20 years ago. If you sell after taxes and fees, you'd clear about $2.8 million. I sat in my car, processing this. My father's investments just kept giving. He'd built an empire one smart decision at a time, always thinking about my future. "What do you think I should do?" I asked James. "That's entirely up to you, Maya. But if you want my advice, sell it. Take that money and do something meaningful with it. Your father would want that." I thought about the scholarship fund, about how 3 students a year wasn't enough. I thought about my art program and how I had to turn kids away because we didn't have enough supplies, enough space. "Sell it," I said. "And let's set up a foundation. A real one. I want to help more kids, more families. I want to build something that will last, something that honors what my father built." James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud of you, Maya. So incredibly proud." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about how far I'd come. 5 years ago, I'd been on my knees, broken by grief and betrayal. I'd been handed divorce papers while I was still mourning my father, and I'd thought my life was over. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Derek had tried to take everything from me, and in the process, he'd lost everything himself. Not because I was cruel, but because he'd built his life on lies and greed, and those foundations couldn't hold. I'd built my life on the values my father taught me, on hard work and integrity and kindness, and those foundations were solid. In the end, that made all the difference. So that's my story. The story of how I lost everything, and then took it all back, and built something even better. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been betrayed or underestimated or pushed to your breaking point where you feel all hope is lost, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories of justice and revenge. And remember, you're stronger than you think. The people who try to break you often end up breaking themselves. See you in the next one.